Welcome to the Story Selling Podcast, the show that explores the art and science of authentic marketing for purpose-led entrepreneurs. With me, your host and founder of the Story Selling Lab, Rob Drummond. This episode of the Story Selling Podcast is sponsored by my agency, the Story Selling Lab, where I help purpose-led entrepreneurs to generate a consistent flow of great clients using LinkedIn ads without funding the big tech Christmas party. To learn more, head to storyselling.biz. On with the show. In my ads management work, both across Google and LinkedIn, I've always worked with what you might consider lead generation clients. So clients who are looking to generate leads, inquiries, if you like, for an offline sales process, people who need to be followed up, maybe on the phone, maybe they get added to an email marketing sequence. I've always had that type of client. And I remember back in the early days, I took on a bunch of Google AdWords as it was called then, Google Ads clients. And to my eyes and to my metrics, things were going quite well. You know, we had our conversion tracking set up. So we were driving people to a website. People would fill in a form on the website. When they filled in that form, that would be counted as a conversion in Google Ads. And to my eyes, things are going quite well. You know, we were spending, a certain amount. We were generating a number of clicks. A decent proportion of those clicks, perhaps about 10% maybe, were filling in the form on the website and saying, yes, I'm interested in this. So to my eyes, I was like, okay, this is going quite well. Like perhaps we should even be spending more on ads. And then one day I get a phone call from the clients and they'd say, really sorry, Rob, but these leads haven't gone anywhere. And cash flow is an issue, so we're going to have to end the project. And I was scratching my head at this because I was like, well, on my end, the outcome of the project was in essence a success. In terms of the objectives of running ads, the objective was to generate leads. We were generating leads. So why weren't those leads becoming clients? There's a number of questions along that. Were they following up with them? Probably not. Did they phone them? I don't know. Did they add them to a robust email marketing follow-up system? Probably not. And that was the line of thinking. That was the core problem, really, that got me involved in email marketing and copywriting and marketing automation. It was a need to take more control over the customer journey. Because in regards to your paid ads, generating a conversion is an interim measure of success. Ultimately, a conversion doesn't equate, usually, if you're a lead generation business, a conversion does not equate to money in your bank. So you still have a responsibility at that point, an obligation, if you like, to nurture those leads, to follow up with those leads, to make sure you're doing everything you can to move that, to qualify those leads, make sure that they're the right people, and move those leads forwards. Now, of course, if you're running paid ads, not all traffic sources are equal. So if you're running Google ads, you'll have a range of different campaigns and keywords driving people to your website. If you're using LinkedIn ads, and you might have different campaigns targeting different audiences, people who work at different size organizations, people who work at different verticals, for instance. So actually, it's quite instructive to know, if you're targeting, say, different verticals. So if you've got vertical A, how do people who become leads from vertical A, do they turn into clients more often than from leads coming from vertical B? That, in essence, is the core question behind lead tracking. And lead tracking is something that exists outside of your ad account. All of the conversion tracking systems that Google and LinkedIn and Meta and all of these platforms, they will help you measure how many people take an action on your website. How many people did you add into your CRM or email marketing system. But beyond that, it's really up to you to measure, well, how well do people of different campaigns, different keywords, different traffic sources that you've paid for, which generally get in touch with you the most often and progress into serious sales conversations. Because if you can figure that out, you can spend more on those leads, even if the clicks are more expensive, even if the conversions are more expensive. Because ultimately, the cost per conversion doesn't actually matter if they're the right people. And that's what you need to know is who are the right people to advertise to. Because if you figure out that a certain sliver, a certain small percentage of your paid media spend is generating the right leads for your business, then you can focus all of your efforts on that tiny sliver, cut out all the rest, and that's going to give you a much more efficient paid media marketing strategy. So that's the topic of today's call, is an introduction to lead tracking. And I want to say at this point that lead tracking is a big topic and it's a potentially complicated topic. In essence, it's quite simple. In essence, what we're doing is when people opt into your world, when they first subscribe to your email list, when they first respond and say, yes, I'm interested in hearing from you and registering for your lead magnet, what we're doing is we're storing in your database, assuming you have an email marketing system or a CRM system, or perhaps it's just a spreadsheet. You've got a spreadsheet of all of your leads this month. What we're doing is we're adding a few columns to that spreadsheet and just asking what campaign did they come from in your ad account? If there was a keyword, what keywords did they trigger? If it was from a paid social account, were they in a remarketing audience or was it a new audience? Because that's going to help you push more resources to the campaigns that are delivering the right people. Because once you've got that in your database, you can then track for all of your leads that have come from paid sources. You'll be able to see, well, which campaign did they come from? And it might be that if you sell high value products and services, perhaps you need to nurture a contact for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. It could take quite some time for that lead to fully decide that they know, like, and trust you and come on board as a client. The conversion tracking in Google Ads, for instance, will only let you track people up to 90 days. So this is why this is a question of CRM, and it's a question of storing in your own systems where a lead originally came from. So we're going to look at three ideas on this episode. The first one is this concept of the CRM system. The second one is cookie-based solutions, and the third one is the KISS, which is keep it simple. So let's have a look at the first idea. As I've already mentioned, lead tracking is really to do with your measurement systems of all the contacts in your database, where did they originally come from? And the contacts that we're most interested in are the ones that you paid for. So lead tracking can be complicated because when somebody fills in a form on your website or when somebody becomes a lead, sometimes there will just be one traffic source. Sometimes it will be that they saw your ad on LinkedIn, they responded to that ad on LinkedIn, they filled in the form on the website, they got added to your database, and you can go, okay, that contact came from campaign A on LinkedIn, and you can store that on their contact record, or you can add that to the spreadsheet of your leads or whatever it is. Often the user journey will be more complicated than that. Sometimes they will click on one of your ads and come to your website. Sometimes what they then do is they browse around, then they get distracted. The phone goes or the door goes and they forget what they're doing. And perhaps they then see one of your remarketing ads, a week or so later, and they go, I was going to go to Rob's website and have a look at his LinkedIn conversation ad guide. I meant to do that. I was partway through doing it and I forgot. So then they click on the remarketing ad, they come back to the website, they then perhaps fill in the form on the website. So you've now got a problem because they've clicked on two separate ads. They clicked on the first ad, which drove them to the website in the first instance, and then they clicked on the remarketing ad as the second ad. So then the question is in your in your CRM system, in your customer database, how do you mark where they came from? In essence, you've got an attribution question here. Is do you give credit to the first ad or to the second ad? My argument for you, in the gist of hopefully keeping this simple, is that you only want to worry about paid advertising sources and you want to give credit to the last thing that they did. There are some reasons against what I've just said, in that often when people convert, especially if they're filling in like quite a big form on your website, maybe it's the form that they fill in at the bottom of the funnel to request a full proposal, they might have quite a complicated user journey to that point. There might be multiple site visits, there might be multiple ad clicks, there might be multiple organic search clicks. They might convert at the end by email, but email is often the last thing that they did, not the first thing. But in general, as a rule of thumb, when someone fills in a form on your website, I would store the last paid click. The details of the last paid click are what I'm most interested in. If they subsequently do an organic search, if they subsequently click on an email link, it's like, that's fine. But what we're trying to do here for our purposes is optimize our ad spend. So it's most instructive, most useful to have the last ad click that they did. So this brings us on to the second idea of how do we do this? Mostly what you need to look at is cookie-based solutions. So the idea is that somebody clicks on a link on one of your ads. What normally needs to happen is that in the URL where they arrive at, there needs to be something called a query parameter. And the query parameter might be the campaign name. It might be campaign equals campaign A. Now, in theory, what you could do is say if they fill in a form on that web page, you might have a hidden field in that form that looks for the URL parameter and goes, oh, they've come from campaign A. And then it will enter campaign A into the hidden field in the form so that entry, that data, gets passed through to your CRM system or perhaps to your spreadsheet or however you're managing your leads. The problem with that approach in terms of just pulling the lead source information from the URL is that actually what some people will do is they'll click on the ad, they'll come to your website, they'll browse around a little bit. They'll browse to your About Us page and they'll have a read about you, and they'll browse to your contact page, and then they'll browse back to the first page that they came from, and then eventually they fill in the form. But because they browsed around the page quite a bit, because they browsed around your website quite a bit, the information, the campaign equals campaign A in the URL bar gets lost as soon as they navigate to a different page. So the reason it's helpful to have a cookie-based solution is that what you can do is store that information in a cookie when they first get to the website. That cookie should probably last for about 30 days. So the cookie could be paid campaign source. If they then fill in any form on your website within a 30-day period, what you want to do is have a hidden field in the form, so a field that is not visible to the user. You want to have a hidden field, and you want to populate that hidden field from the data stored in the cookie. So the cookie will store that the person's last paid campaign was LinkedIn campaign A. Even if they come back to the website 29 days later via an organic search or via an email click, as long as they've not clicked on another ad link, that cookie will still say that their last paid medium was LinkedIn, the last paid campaign was campaign A. So then you want to have hidden fields for last paid source, which was in this case would have been LinkedIn, last paid campaign, which would have been campaign A. On their contact record in your customer database, you then need fields for these things so that you can store that this contact, Joe Blogs, the last campaign he came from was campaign A, and he came from LinkedIn. So that in 6 months' time, you can review, okay, how many contacts in my database came from LinkedIn? How many contacts in my database came from campaign A? Then how many of those contacts became qualified leads? This is really what you need to know, because if you generated, say, 20 conversions from campaign A, you need to know how many of those within a sensible time frame, and I think 6 months is probably a good period to do this. How many within 6 months became qualified leads? Because if you've got, for instance, campaign A that drove 20 leads and 5 of those became qualified leads, but then you've got campaign B that only drove, 8 leads, but 7 of those became qualified leads, then that gives you a strong use case for spending much more on campaign B, because it was lower volume, it generated fewer leads, but actually overall it generated more qualified leads. So your cost per qualified lead was probably much lower, even if the numbers in LinkedIn ads suggest that the cost per conversion was higher, the cost per click was higher. All of those things don't matter. The only thing that matters is the cost per qualified lead. And to get to the cost per qualified lead, you need to have systems in place for tracking where each lead came from. What was the last paid ad they clicked on? What was the last campaign they engaged with before becoming a lead? The final thing I'll leave you with is to keep it simple. So, as you're hopefully getting a feel for listening to this episode, some of my listeners will listen to this and go, "Oh, actually, this makes loads of sense. I'm generating, 30 leads a month from LinkedIn or 30 leads a month from Google. I would like to know which of those 30 become qualified leads." That's really the question that we're asking, because once you know that, you can dial in your ad spend on the sources that provide those qualified leads. Other people listening to this might have listened to this and go, "Oh man, that's like made my brain hurt." So, well, if it's making your brain hurt now, it can get much more complicated. Because if you expand lead tracking to all of your marketing, you might actually want to know, okay, so what's the impact of your organic search? How do people who search for you organically, how do they convert into qualified leads? What's the impact of your email marketing? How often do people respond to your emails as the last thing before they fill in an important form on your website? It can become quite complicated. There are solutions for this. So, for example, you can look at something like Wicked Reports, where when somebody fills in a key form on your website, they will have a look at the entire user journey. They will have a look at all of the interaction points, and they'll give like a weighted value to each one. And they'll work out, okay, so if you're running ads on LinkedIn, a certain number of people responded to that ad and became a lead. But some people also saw that ad and then converted later via a different ad, and they'll assign a bit of credit to it just because it kind of contributed to a different lead. I think for most of my clients, this is all very interesting, but I think it's actually beyond what most people need. There is a huge step up in your reporting if you can just have basic systems, and it might be just that you're measuring people who fill in a form on your website. I'll just add at the moment that if you're generating phone calls from your website, if you're using paid ads to send people to your website, and people phone you from a tracked number on your website, you can still do this. There are paid ways of figuring out someone's traffic source when they phone you from a number on your website, but it requires a paid tracking solution. But for most of my clients, what we're doing is we're measuring when people fill in a form on your website, what was the last paid click that they clicked on. We're storing that in the CRM system. So you probably are going to need a CRM system. If you're paying money to generate leads and you're not adding those contacts to a CRM system, it doesn't seem sustainable to me, because it's like not having a centralized place for your data. It's like not having a memory almost. So I think you need a CRM system, and you need to have fields on the contact record that indicate what was the last campaign somebody came from, what was the last, what was the last medium. So did they come from LinkedIn or from Google? Did they come from Meta or somewhere else? Those often are the kind of two main things. If Google is a big part of your strategy, you also want to have a field for keyword as well. What keyword did they come from? because that's going to really help you dial in your keyword strategy. After 6 months, then what you want to do is have a 6-monthly review process where you look back over the previous 6 months, and say, okay, we've generated 50 leads on this particular channel, in this particular campaign. How many of those became qualified leads versus campaign B, which generated, 10 leads, but 9 of them became qualified leads. That's what you need to know. That's what you need to know to dial in your strategy. So it is work to put this in place. It is, in some respects, slightly complicated, but it's not impossible. And I would strongly encourage you to pursue this if paid advertising is an important part of your marketing plans and you generate leads. So you need to follow up with those leads via offline systems, via email marketing, via sending people a proposal or whatever. I would strongly encourage you to put in some basic lead tracking measures in place. Hopefully this has made some kind of sense. If I've blown your mind and you just like to speak to me to explain it in person, head to storyselling.biz, follow the contact page there, get in touch. We'll go from there. Otherwise, I would just like to say thank you for listening. I greatly appreciate your time. I hope these episodes are helpful. If you have found these episodes helpful, please do share the Story Selling Podcast with your networks, whether that's on LinkedIn, whether that's with your client base. It really helps to spread the word. And feel free to leave a review in your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you then. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Story Selling Podcast, you'll want to make sure you're on my email list. Head to storyselling.biz/podcast, where you can opt in to future episode notifications and also download my Lead Incubator Blueprint. You can also find my book, Simple Story Selling, on Amazon in paperback and Kindle formats. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.